Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Andy Brockway. I'm chair of the Kelley's Corner Steering Committee. Thank you for being here tonight. So tonight we're doing a presentation, sort of an update on the overall plan, and so we're responding to some particular comments that came out of town meetings and some subsequent meetings. So first, some introductions before we get into it. So with me tonight in the committee is Larry Kana, who's also on EDC, Peter Barry, who's obviously selectman, Peter Darlow, John Benson, although you're now a selectman, Bob M. Meter, and somebody, Aaron Vitez, and Christian Anderson. Yeah, Christy, sorry. And also important tonight is that we have with us the engineers who have been working on the project, our consultants from GPI, Lindsay, Barbie, and John. So first, we're just going to let Lindsay's going to run through the plans, sort of give you an idea about what the plans overall are, because I think that's one problem people had is they didn't really have a chance to sort of see the plans. And so she'll go over the plans, give some idea about what went into the plans, the factors influencing it, and then we'll address some of the questions that people have had, for example, about are there extra turning lanes, are there the impact on trees, is the plan car-centric, for example, concerns like that. And so I'm trying to make this as conversational as possible once Lindsay sort of gets through her piece of it. And then in terms of the questions and answers, if we can first focus on the work and then maybe talk about the process later, that would be helpful to sort of move things along. So without further ado, I'll give it over to Lindsay.
So as Andy said, we'll try to keep this as a sort of a project overview, and then we do have the ability to talk through all the plans in specific, but we'll cover mostly the areas, sort of the more main areas of the project, and then can answer any detailed questions. So first thing, project area, I'm sure you've all seen a similar image to this, but essentially it's Mass Ave Route 111 and Main Street Route 27 forming the intersection at Kelley's Corner. And also the project involves the reconstruction of Community Lane, forming that triangle in the center there. It's about just under 1.2 miles total. And quickly before we get into the plans, I just want to talk about the project schedule. I'll just touch on it briefly. We submitted the 25% design submission to Mass DOT and to the town in February. And because of the funding processes and the Mass DOT involvement, we do have to follow their processes, which includes, after the 25%, a Mass DOT review process, a utility walkthrough after that, comment resolution and discussion of all of their comments that they will give to us. And then at that point, they would allow a design public hearing, which at this point would probably be sometime in the fall of this year. We are currently at the Mass DOT review phase, so they've had the plans for a few months and are currently reviewing, and we will get a stack of comments from them to sort of review and begin addressing comments before the design proceeds any further. Beyond that, it turns into the 75% submission, same process, 100% submission, same process. So we're very early in the Mass DOT process at the 25% design level here. Just the goals of the project really is to begin to transition Kelley's Corner into a more walkable town center. There's obviously a lot of commercial development and the schools and properties that really bring a lot of folks to town. Incorporated pedestrian and bicycle accommodations, which is a requirement now with a lot of the developments to have complete streets elements and allow anyone, users of all ages and abilities to feel comfortable walking and biking in the area. Provide ADA accessibility, which is important in a lot of areas here. You really can't walk safely, and there are not any accessibility options for those with disabilities. Improve intersection and roadway safety, efficiently manage traffic volumes. There's obviously a lot of congestion and delays, so a lot of the goals here are to address those. Provide access to businesses. Obviously the congestion makes it difficult in some areas, and for economic development, that's one of the main goals. Other goals, Charter Road and the schools that are accessed by Charter Road. Safety is a concern there, so looking at that intersection, and there are some site distance issues there we can talk about. Managing driveways and curb cuts, and promoting connectivity and walkability. So really a lot about the complete streets elements, traffic management, and safety. Very quickly, there are federal and state funding sources that tie us to certain design requirements. We don't really just pick things out of a hat and design with them. We have a lot of guidelines that we have to go by, and a lot of them tie back to the funding sources. So a lot of this project, the construction, will be paid for by state and federal funding, and I've laid out a couple of those very specific funding programs that are often tied to certain things like either bicycles and pedestrians or congestion mitigation and air quality, and improving intersections, streamlining them, adding turn lanes so that you can reduce the congestion. So to further talk about the design standards and constraints, really when we start with these projects, you kind of have to look at what roadways you're designing for and do full traffic studies and things like that to really come up with what the design is going to be. But you have an existing right-of-way width. You have Mass Ave as a state-owned highway, so you have the state highway layout that tells you what's the public right-of-way there. And then Main Street is a town layout, so you have a certain width there. Specifically, Main Street has a 50-foot existing right-of-way, and Mass Ave has a 60-foot. Vehicle lane width, when you look at the type of roadway you have, this project comes down to a 12-foot minimum standard design requirement for Main Street, just because it's on a national highway safety corridor. But through this design process, we've minimized that to an 11-foot. And that process, you ask for a design exception. So we've minimized the vehicle lanes. They'll be 11-foot most consistently, 10-foot in areas where you can get away with that for turn lanes. Shoulder width is something you have to think about. You have to provide shoulder for a variety of reasons, safety, maintenance, drainage, and things like that. But because you also have to provide bicycle accommodations, you can get away with combining a shoulder and a bicycle lane, which is what we've done in this project, where it's can be considered sort of the minimal impact, where you can share a 5-foot shoulder off the roadway adjacent to your vehicle lanes will also act as a 5-foot bike lane. Bike lane provisions, the standards vary, but there's oftentimes you can have a separated bike lane, a wider bike lane. In this case, we went with the 5-foot bike lane combined with the shoulder, just because it's obviously a very tight area. There's a lot going on, so you can't really fit a full build out of a separated bike lane here. So that's sort of the story behind the 5-foot bike lane and shoulder. And then you have pedestrian accommodations, so the sidewalk widths can vary. The minimum is typically 5.5 feet, including the curb, so a 5-foot sidewalk beyond the curb. And in most cases, that's what we have here. In some cases, we have a 6-foot sidewalk where there was room for that. And in between the curb and the sidewalk, in areas where it can be achieved here or where it's desired, there's a landscape or a streetscape buffer. So you can put, sometimes you have to put utility poles in those. You can put lighting if there's lighting, but more importantly, you can landscape, have some grass, have some shrubs and trees, if that's part of the design goals, which in this case it is. That also helps address the walkability, connectivity, and you really feel comfortable, gives you a sense of separation from the roadway with the sidewalk. So that's the vegetated buffer. Another pretty significant item is utility pole relocations here. You have a lot of overhead wires and utilities, and along one side or the other of both roadways, there's going to be quite a few utility pole relocations because if we left them where we were, they would either be in the new roadway or in the sidewalk, and you just have to shift them either to the back of a sidewalk or within one of these buffers. So that's really the starting point of all the design elements in the project. So overview of the improvements. The circles on the plan show you the intersections. The first one on the left is where Charter Road is for the schools. And at that location, the main improvement there is that the intersection will be signalized and realigned. We can get into the details of those in just a bit. Main Street and Mass Ave, capacity improvements and new signal equipment. Mass Ave and Community Lane, which is the third dot on Mass Ave you can see there. That will be signalized, as well as Main Street and Community Lane, which is sort of the top of the triangle there, will be signalized. Project-wide, beyond the intersections, you have bike lanes and what are called bike boxes that we can look at intersections, pedestrian crosswalks, curb ramps, streetscape, all the things we just talked about. There are areas where we add left turn lanes so that you can access businesses throughout either Main Street or Mass Ave, and signing and pavement markings and drainage and utility improvements project-wide. So for some specific areas, I thought I would go into some of the challenges in the design and then where what the proposed improvements are. So here you're looking at Charter Road. So let's see if I have okay, so this here is Charter Road and this is Mass Ave. So this picture shows the intersection Charter Road and Mass Ave, and the crest of the vertical geometry, the curve here is obviously makes it difficult to see when you're coming out of Charter Road, and that's what I was referring to as the sight distance issue, which is one of the safety concerns that was recognized throughout the study. Another thing to mention is this is actually looking down Charter Road toward the schools. There's really one lane in either direction currently. You have utilities. You also have this tree just along the edge of the pavement here today. And the top photo just shows how the Charter Road meets Mass Ave, and you also have this driveway, Kmart, what it may be in the future, not sure, that you want to consider when you're looking at improvements there. So those are some of the challenges when you look at Charter Road. So looking at, this is an image of really the existing condition. So this is, the intersection is unsignalized today. So the red lines here will show you in the peak morning hour on a given day based on the traffic study that's been developed. The queues, this number is the feet. And so on each leg of the intersection you can see, it's obviously unsignalized here, so there's no queue. But the queue here is about 740 feet, and we've taken it as far as we can on the map there. But this is the existing condition, so peak hour, morning, this is really what you see for queues there. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just add one thing to that, John Diaz with GPI. Obviously, one of the other studies we worked on was the bus routing for the schools and moving the high school up, or moving the high school back. One of the biggest issues is getting the buses out of this property in the morning. So if they're at the back of that 750-foot queue, it obviously takes them a lot of time to get through that intersection. So the signal has that added benefit outside of this project. It also has the benefit of making that movement a safe move both in and out, but also reducing that queue drastically.
So the proposed improvements, this is just a shot of the same plan that you see here. And just as a quick overview, I'm not sure how well you can see it, but the bright red lines that you can see here, that's existing edge of pavement. So when you look at these plans, that's the existing edge of roadway where the pavement ends today. The green that you see is the bike lanes. The travel lanes aren't hatched or any color. They're just, you can see the markings for the different lanes. And pretty much everything. So we're looking at realigning. You can see Charter Road today in its existing configuration, and we're looking at essentially shifting it to the west. That does a couple of things that helps solve the sight distance issue, but also does the signalization help the sight distance issue because you're not trying to just beat the guy coming over the hill to get out. But it also allows you more separation from the Main Street Mass Ave intersection, which is to the east from here, and any queues that develop at that intersection. Essentially, you are adding a southbound right turn lane from Charter onto Mass Ave. You have a through and a left on Charter. And on Mass Ave, here you have a left onto Charter, a through, and a right into this potential development driveway, which is at the edge of that property at the Kmart entrance today. And in the westbound direction, you have a right and a through, and a left into the development. Again, pedestrian and bike accommodations, you can see crosswalks, accessible curb ramps. And this is looking at in the proposed condition, what the traffic analysis looks like. So you can see a few things here. You now have since it's signalized, you have the queues in both directions here and the queues on Charter. So what you see is that the queues on Charter have gone down by half, 326 or 643 in the 95th percentile. And you can see how the signal here impacts eastbound and westbound traffic on Mass Ave.
Yeah, so again, that's just in terms of terminology, the 50th percentile queue is basically your average queue. The 95th percentile queue represents 95% of the time during that hour. So say 3 minutes, you're gonna always have a queue less than that. So instead of that 750 foot queue that we showed before with the signalized or the stop controlled approach, on average that queue drops down to about 320 feet. And there will be a peak of about 4, 5, 6 minutes where it does extend up to 650 feet, but that will work down as opposed to constantly being there. The other added benefit is obviously, you know, we mentioned the sight distance as you're pulling out looking left, but also looking, if you're traveling east trying to make the left turn into the site, trying to see the traffic approach you over that grade is difficult. So again, pulling that back increases that sight line, and also providing the left turn lane with the left turn signal into the school greatly improves that movement into the site.
So moving further down Mass Ave in the eastbound direction, I thought it was important to look at this length between Charter Road and the Main Street Mass Ave intersection for a few reasons. We obviously, this picture here shows, it's looking toward the Main Street Mass Ave intersection in this direction. You can see the edge of pavement today, and I think there's about a foot maybe-ish shoulder beyond the vehicle lane here. And from there, it slopes up pretty good at a 2-to-1 grade where you have an asphalt sidewalk on the hill there, and then you have some vegetation and trees at the top of the hill before the fields back here. So this is a challenge just because if you can picture widening this at all, even if just for a shoulder or a bike lane, you really end up cutting into that slope, which becomes a challenge for any growth there, which is sort of a key issue in this. We can look at the plans in just a minute. The other notable property is near the Baker Whitney, the house near the Baker Oil Company. This you'll see on our plans is the constraint as far as where we can align the roadway. The proposed improvements essentially go right up to the edge of their front stoop there. So that's somewhat of a controlling factor in that in this section of Mass Ave when you look at where the roadway is placed and if you can shift the alignment at all. Let's see, this is sort of the same picture, I guess. So proposed improvements here. You're looking at 11-foot turn lanes, a 5-foot bike lane, which is the same as the shoulder, and 5.5-foot pedestrian sidewalks. Before you get closer to the intersection, you have an 8-foot landscape buffer where we propose planting trees and lighting. And on this side, you have a slightly narrowed section just because you're limited in the room you have on this side of the roadway. So based on that picture of the tree and the slope you saw there, the widening here, this red is the edge of pavement, the widening to basically accommodate the shoulder and bike lane cuts into that slope there, and therefore we do have a retaining wall along those fields in the old, just past the old high school property there, which we can show you a section of how that will look, but essentially the sidewalk and the buffer areas at the elevation of the roadway, and then a retaining wall is along the edge there. It's a bit taller than the existing one that's there in some areas today just because of the slopes and the grades of the roadway. So moving towards Mass Ave at Main Street. So there are quite a few challenges here. It's obviously pretty congested, but what you're looking at here is actually the proposed improvements, but you can see the edge of pavement in the red, and then also the back of sidewalk or sort of back of the proposed improvements here. So you can see that the existing width of the roadway, it will be widened at essentially all 4 corners of the intersection to accommodate the capacity improvements as well as the bicycle lane, shoulder, and sidewalk accommodations. But essentially the challenges here are the existing right-of-way. As I said, Mass Ave, the state layout is about 60 feet wide. Town layout on Main Street is 50 feet wide. So when you're looking at adding shoulders, turn lanes, or bike lanes, or sidewalks, we're really pushing on the existing right-of-way limits there. So you do have property encroachments and takings or easements in this area. Another difficulty here is you have somewhat of a skewed intersection as it is. So in trying to minimize impacts to properties or looking at where else you can align the intersection better to reduce impacts, you do have to struggle with the fact that you can't have through traffic approaching or turning traffic approaching traffic in the opposite direction just by skewing that intersection. So the next photo, I believe, shows you the challenge with topography and the grades at on the hill here. So we're basically looking at the gas stations over here, the real estate offices here, and you can see the elevation change here makes it pretty difficult. So this section right here shows you the proposed improvements, which is the roadway, and then you have sidewalk, and you have a wall along this existing property. And the alignment and the roadway widening there essentially maxes out what you can do at this location and still achieve the grades to get up their driveway. So grades on all sides of this intersection were a challenge in laying out the proposed improvements. So here is just a shot of the improvements. We can talk in more detail in a bit, but you do have capacity improvements. You have 2 left turn lanes on the eastbound approach, Mass Ave, and 2 receiving lanes at this Main Street northbound. You have a left turn on Main Street northbound here. You have left turn, a through lane, and a right and through lane. And then you have your eastbound left and straight through and right turn lane here. So there are capacity improvements here in addition to the sidewalk and bike lane improvements you see here. So there's a bit of widening and property impacts. I'm gonna let you take over this one.
Thanks. I get the joy of talking about all the traffic and lane configurations at the main intersection, so bear with me. So as Lindsay showed with this current configuration, the original design had a through and a dedicated right turn lane here. And what we were seeing in general was, obviously this is the controlling, this is the heart of the whole area and what happens here and getting traffic through here. What we were seeing was this eastbound approach was queuing up excessively, as was the northbound approach. So we were trying to come up with ways to reduce those so that we could, I mean, we want to create an intersection where if we're making the improvements, we don't want to make things worse, basically. We want to create something that can process the traffic through there in a safe manner. And so that when it's built, people don't come back and say, we just spent X million of dollars and I'm waiting longer than I was before. So when we looked at this option here and said, well, what if we could fit in a double left turn lane there? What would that do? And it does a couple of things. It obviously gets more traffic turning left in the morning, but by having 2 receiving lanes here, we could now get that, what was just a right turn lane, turn that into a through right lane and process more traffic there. So we looked at that, and when we ran through 3 scenarios just to compare. So that's scenario 1, what's shown here. Scenario 2 was obviously, we're concerned about this business as well and the impacts that the project will have there. So we looked at what would happen if we took that lane out. So basically we just had a left and a through right and took that lane out. So we didn't have as much impact to that property. So that's scenario 2 here. And then scenario 3 was what happens if we did that and we also took out the left lane, just did one left lane there. So those are the 3 options that we looked at. So this is currently proposed with the 2 lefts eastbound and the 3 lanes coming northbound. So we're looking at, on average, a left turn queue of about 700, I'm dyslexic, 100 feet, with the 95th percentile queue of about just under 300, and about 500 feet maximum queue, and about 160 feet on average. So worst case, you're backing up to basically the current charter road. The new intersection would be over here a little more. So you're basically filling up that space. This is the morning, the worst case I'm sorry, this is the PM, the worst case. So the other queues are pretty much standard here. You got about a 300-foot queue, which is just beyond basically the access driveways here. So in that range here. Southbound isn't too bad. It's, well, almost to community lane, not quite. So that's where we are right now. So if we take this out, if we take that extra lane out, you can see what happens. Your queues here, not too much is happening up at the other three approaches. As you'd expect, we're not really impacting anything there. But your queue on the northbound approach goes up significantly, goes to about 700 on average to almost 1,000 feet. So, I mean, you can just visually see the impacts there. Sure. This is the worst case in the evening right now. They're similar. I mean, we can do a graphic for the morning as well. But we just wanted to show the worst case right now. So then going from 2 to 3, if we take out that left, what happens is now that goes up even more. And what you see here is, this looks a little strange, but it makes sense if you think about it. What happens is you've just got one single left turn lane, so that left lane now spills over. Your through lane actually gets a little smaller because you can't get to the through lane because it's blocked by the spillover of the left turn vehicles. Also, you notice here what happens is that queue drops a little, which makes sense because what happens is we need more time to process this left so this left can go longer. But more importantly, you start to see these queues back up dramatically along the main corridor as well as even further down on the northbound approach. So in terms of delay and some of the operational characteristics that we look at, so overall that intersection as proposed with the double, I'll say the double left and the double north, for lack of a better term, your average delay is for the intersection is about 47, 45 seconds. If you go to a single lane northbound, that goes up to 80. And if you take the left as well, you're up to about 140 seconds. So pretty significant difference in operations, yes?
Yeah, being one that's gone through Kelley's Corner many times through my 19 years of living here in Acton, I've noticed that the school traffic has a really profound impact on the queue ups and delays at that light. Has that been included in your modeling?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So could you share that? Because I have a very good traffic consultant with TEC that...
We're happy to share whatever analysis you want.
Yeah, thank you.
And just so you know, these three signals will all be part of a coordinated system. Most likely a step above that, either a peer-to-peer or adaptive system. So particularly in the morning, to address that concern, we can design the system essentially to flush that traffic from the school out and through the intersection.
Okay. Thank you.
In terms of another criteria we look at is volume to capacity, which is basically you have a certain capacity for the lane. If you have more volume than you have capacity, that's a bad thing. So over 1 is bad. So with the first option, or the double lefts and double north, we're beneath 1. We're at about a 0.8 overall for the intersection. That goes up if we take the northbound to just about capacity. On average, the intersection is at capacity. If we take the eastbound, we throw that intersection over capacity. Yes?
The volume that you're talking about here, is that current, or is that projected outward?
This is projected out at 20 years. And that's standard. This is a state project. When we go through the process, we have to look at traffic projections through the future. And it's pretty minimal growth out here. We're using only 0.5% per year. So it's over that 20 years, it's about 11% growth over that. And we've looked at the volumes. They're consistently going up in the area. We looked at, there was a decrease in, obviously, the 2007, 2008 when the economy tanked. But we're seeing the traffic levels since then, they're coming back up, and they're beyond the levels they were back in before the crash in 2008. So we're seeing that trend go up. And again, one of the things we have to look at is, it's an investment, so that, again, Mass DOT is coming in and funding this. They want to make sure that what they're building is going to work for, some period of time. So, this is an improvement. These are changes that are going to be in place for a significant amount of time, and you're not going to have a chance to build it and then come back and say, oh, it doesn't work, we want to build it again next year. So we want to make sure we're addressing the things. We don't want to go overboard, obviously, but we want to be conservative when we do build it. Just back to you, right?
Okay, so one other area we wanted to touch on is north of Community Lane, Main Street northbound. You can see the Hosmer House here. In that general area, a section there we thought was important to show just because of the historic property there. You have a lot of utility pole relocations, you have some topography to deal with, and you have a lot of businesses where you need to get in and out. So the general section in this vicinity, I should say between the intersection and the Hosmer House, you will have an area where you can have your vegetated buffer in between your sidewalk, and you have your lanes and your sidewalk. But up in this area, we really limited it to reduce the impacts specifically on the Hosmer House property. So what you see here is the existing edge of pavement. Again, you can see the widening that's occurring, but the sidewalks have no buffer. It's just the bike lane, shoulder, and then a curb and a sidewalk, and then your property line. So this section in particular is a bit different than the rest of the project, just to reduce the impacts on the historic property there. There is a taking that is required. It's you can see a sliver of red here. That's the amount of layout alteration that's required based on this section, getting it as narrow as we could in this area. I somewhat just went through that. This is the proposed improvements in that location just discussed. Yep.
So is that a traffic island?
This is an island here, yes. Yep. And what you don't see, you do see this left turn lane is what approaches Community Lane. So that will be your left onto Community Lane. And then here you have, this is the entrance that will be the Dunkin' Donuts entrance. So you have a left turn lane that ends right here to go onto Dunkin' Donuts. So this is essentially the shadowed left for this left turn lane and that left turn lane.
There's an area around there that the kids actually cross. There's nowhere near a crosswalk. Is that where you're putting this?
Correct. No. So you can the kids come off that utility easement right somewhere over here. There's a signalized intersection at Community Lane and Main Street here that ideally we would like to have the students walk back to and cross there safely because they're probably going to Dunkin' Donuts or something like that in this location. So they would be coming out here and crossing at this location is quite close to that Community Lane signalized intersection. So they would have to walk a bit further. We wouldn't be able to add a crosswalk right at that location just because of the distance. But the 25% does show a crosswalk here. We haven't received comments back. It may be that they don't suggest a crosswalk at that location, just given the traffic and the signal here and the Route 2 ramp coming off here. So that's something that we looked at, and that is in the plans now, but it may be something that's up for discussion depending. But we know they do cross here, and they may still do that in the day, but when this is developed, but they do have the ability to go to the signalized crossing at Community Lane. So that's really wraps up the overview of some of these project areas. Like I said, we can talk in more detail for certain questions, but really the next steps in the process would be receiving those review comments from Mass DOT, all the department divisions there. Also the town, we've received some comments since the town received the plans. We then have to go on a utility site walk to talk about all the utility pole relocations, the underground utilities that are impacted, and that involves all the utility companies as well as Mass DOT and town. And then we have a comment resolution meeting with Mass DOT. This all takes a little bit of time, and then you get to the public hearing part. So Oftentimes, there are changes that happen after the public hearing. There are changes that happen before the public hearing based on comments and certain things that need to be changed before you go to public hearing. But that will sort of all be worked out in the next few months, and I would anticipate that around fall 2018. After that, it's public comments and then getting the approval to go to 75 if that's what happens.
One concern that has come up is that this is more of a traffic movement plan than a pedestrian safety plan. And particularly with widening the roads, for instance, I don't know, is it 50 feet from curb to curb now on Mass Ave from the Verizon switching building to Bueno Asano? And what is that going to go to? And how does that make it safer if it's 20 feet more to get across?
You want me to take? Oh, yeah, sure, I'll take that.
Sure.
For disabled people or young students who come there.
Right, so this is the existing edge of pavement right now. Okay, so, and what you're seeing here, really at the intersection, the only widening we're doing is to provide the bike lanes, so that this is now the new proposed curb, this is currently the edge of road, and this is your 5-foot bike lane. So at the intersection, that's what we're doing, is just widening to provide the bike lane. So 10 feet. Now, in terms of the crossings, the signals are timed for the pedestrian crossing. They're timed for a walking speed of 3.5 seconds, which is a pretty slow walking speed. That's built into the signal operations so that you have time to cross the entire, from getting off one sidewalk or ramp to getting on the other. So that's designed into the system to accommodate that. You can also, there's also technology out there that you can have a button that is let's say normally times for a 4 foot per second walking speed, and you can, if you hold it longer, it will give you longer to cross. But we generally we have to time it for 3.5, which is already, we used to do 4 feet per second, and now we're doing 3.5. The clearances are also, we used to just clear, the thought would be that, you know, and just for those not familiar with how a pedestrian signal works, you can be in the intersection when it's flashing. When it's flashing, don't walk. The 7 seconds is to get you off of the curb. The time in the flashing is actually the time needed to cross from the curb to the curb. So we always hear we only get 7 seconds. Yeah.
Hey, John, I just want to point out that a lot of the people that will be crossing aren't going to get the little tutorial that you just gave us. And also, a lot of these kids are my age, my son's age kids. They're like elementary school, junior high school kids. There's a huge population of kids across kitty corner to the Bueno Asano and Sorrento's Pizza and all that.
Right.
There's a huge draw of kids. If you ever go into that intersection,
Oh, yeah.
on a given school day, you'll see rows of kids coming in that intersection. And they don't have the common sense that, you know, the adults do. So, I mean, I just want to point that out.
Yeah, and that's understandable, and I mean, you know, whether they're crossing an extra 10 feet, that's a different issue. I mean, it is an education issue. I mean, it's no different than saying, once you press the button, wait for the walk to come on, don't press the button and walk across. You have to wait for it to come up. I mean, that's, you know, but to come back to the point, so that flashing don't walk period is to get you from here to here, all the way across. And that's changed recently. It used to be to get you to the middle of the last lane, figuring that, those last few steps don't matter. The cars aren't moving that fast. But now you have to go all the way across. So in other words, if we, at 3.5 feet, it takes 20 seconds to cross from here to here, you get a 7-second walk, and usually you get like at least a 20, if not like a 22-second flashing don't walk. So that's built into the design. And also, I mean, just in terms of these will all now be ADA accessible ramps, which they're not now. So I mean, just in terms of the accessibility, you ask it how they would cross it now, they can't cross it now. So I mean, just the physical improvements make it easier to cross. These will be the audio tactile buttons, yes.
Tara Fredericks, West Acton, and we've had a request from the tech folks that if you want to be heard by the people on TV, or that will look at this later, come to the mic. So I just want to make the point that you had said that the widening of the road is because of the bike lanes, but if you didn't have the extra turning lane, there would be no widening of the road. So I don't want to blame it on the bike lanes when it's equally blamable on the extra turning lane.
Right now, this is the existing edge of pavement, okay? So that's where your existing edge of pavement is right now. So at the intersection right here, that red line is where the pavement ends and the edge of road begins. So if you were not adding any lanes, if you were going to add the bike lanes there, you would have to widen the road.
Well, yes, but if you look at it completely, the same measurements, but you don't put in the extra turning lane, then you can put the bike lanes in without widening the road.
Right now, I'm not looking at the future condition. Right now, you go out there right now, the edge of road is here, the edge of road is here. There is no accommodation for bike there. If you were to add a bike lane on either side, you would still have to widen that road.
If you took out the turning lane, you'd have room for the bike lanes.
If I took out the existing turning lane?
No, you took out one of those extra the 2 turning lanes. You could take out one of those turning lanes
This is existing pavement.
I give up. Anyway.
This is existing edge of pavement. Maybe we're not speaking the same language. The existing road is physically there. We're restriping it. The width of that road there is the same.
Restripe it first with a bike lane and then see you won't have room for an extra turning lane. I'm saying make the priority be the bikeable person and not the fast traffic person.
If we just put bike lanes in with what's there, we would be taking existing lanes away from what's there now.
No, there's only 1 turning lane there, sir.
I understand. There is 1 turning lane there, and that is where the edge of road is. If we are adding 10 feet to the road to put 5-foot shoulder on either side, we will have to widen the existing pavement that's there.
I'm saying no, don't put the second turn lane.
I'm not putting the second turn lane.
Well,
with 1 turn lane with what is there now, to provide a bike lane on either side, we would have to widen 10 feet.
But you can use the turning lane instead.
The existing lanes that are out there, 1 eastbound, 1 westbound, and 1 turn lane is what the pavement width is. If we were to provide bike lanes, we would need an additional 10 feet to maintain 1 single left turn lane.
I have the same confusion she does. Is it because you're making narrower turn lanes? I mean, why can you add 2? If it was 1 and the turn lane was narrower,
right now you have a shoulder which is about 1 or 2 feet. You have a 12-foot lane. You have another 12-foot turn lane. And you have another shoulder and a 12-foot opposing lane and a shoulder. So your pavement width, we can now go to 10-foot lanes here. We can go to an 11-foot travel lane in either direction because we're providing the shoulders. So we can reuse the existing width of pavement there, redivision that so that we're providing the 2 left turn lanes. But to provide the shoulders, whether we provide this configuration or leave it as it is, we still have to widen. We are able to redistribute the pavement width that's out there and make the lanes a little narrower because we are adding the shoulder. If we were not to add the shoulder, we would have to have wider lanes, which is what's out there now.
Is that like a state rule, you mean?
What kind of state rule?
Well, what is the rule that says that I'm just trying to understand why if you're adding just the bike lane and you kept these same narrow turning lanes, wouldn't it end up like what? Is there a rule that says you have to have the shoulder in order to have narrow turning lanes?
Yes, you can reduce your lane width. We're going for an 11-foot waiver. You're supposed to have 12-foot lanes.
That's what we were missing. Yeah.
We are going for a waiver for an 11-foot lane because we are providing the 5-foot shoulder.
Okay, so, but do you have to have the 2 turning lanes?
We don't have to. If the town wants to, I shouldn't say that. This is state highway. They may not want to live with that. The town may want to live with this, but this is the reality of what we're talking about here if we take that lane out. So we're not gonna tell you have to do it. That's not our decision to make. But this is the reality of where you will be if you take that lane.
Well, I think the reason I'm asking is because I think that a lot of us are going for slow, like a lo-fi Kelley's Corner, not, as you say, managing the traffic volume, getting more efficient with the traffic volume. To me, that's not a concern for me at all. I mean, I live in Acton. I don't go through Kelley's Corner at certain times of day. And that's just a reality. I don't want to give up my town to make the state happy with its economic development plans or to facilitate, commuters, frankly. I think that it's a safety issue, and I think that we have larger, more important issues than moving the traffic. But I've already said that, and I'm going to let other people speak.
There we go. Okay. Oh, wait. Ready? Okay. Hi, no, that's all right. Danny Factor. I'm a member of the Commission on Disabilities, but I'm speaking as a private citizen. But I just want to make a comment and then ask a question that's completely less related to disability issues. But I just want to make a comment that, at the Commission on Disabilities, we represent people with all sorts of physical and mental disabilities, people who use wheelchairs, but also a lot of people who don't use wheelchairs, who have other kinds of mobility issues. They may have lung issues, they may have leg issues, and their challenge has to do, they are walkers, but they still have challenges walking. And while I appreciate any time that you have these types of projects, one of the requirements is ADA compliance, and it does create a lot more ease in many ways, particularly for people who use wheelchairs. I have to say that about the most common complaint we get having to do with streets. I won't take that personally. Did I touch it with my foot? Oh.
Yeah. You can.
About the most common complaint we get from pedestrians in town has to do with the amount of time it takes to cross a street, and real fear that people with, who are ambulatory but have mobility issues have about being able to cross the street in time and having to go faster than they feel that they're able to. So I just want to point that out, that there are, granted, there are advantages to making things more level and more ADA compliant. There are also tremendous disadvantages in increasing the amount of walking time crossing the street for many people with disabilities. So I just throw that out as an observation. My main comment that I wanted to make is that the two words that I have not heard yet tonight, I'm surprised that I haven't heard it, is environmental sustainability. And I know a lot of us are concerned about being in a climate emergency and trying to do what we can about swiftly and very fastly reducing our fossil fuel use. And that means trying to do what we can to get cars off the road. That means that we should be trying to reduce our car use and swiftly transition to public transportation and to other ways of transport that don't require fossil fuels. If that, in fact, is the goal, shouldn't we be trying to make car use less convenient instead of more convenient? And how is then allowing for creating conditions such as the turning lanes that are going to provide swifter traffic, how is that even a good thing? How is doing that any different than just making it easier to do harm? And it's not a rhetorical question.
I don't know if there is an answer for that, to be honest. I mean, we struggle with that all the time, and we hear all the, you know, you bring up that topic, then you get into connected vehicles, and if people are using that, and it's a tough one. I mean, we do struggle with that. I mean, the fact is the cars are there now. The emissions that they're emitting now and that they would be emitting, you know, sitting in a 700-foot queue are significant. That's an issue to consider as well. So if we can improve that traffic flow through there and reduce those emissions, that is a positive. That's a net positive to reduce the air emissions, and that's one of the funding sources we have here is CMAQ funding, which is congestion management and air quality improvements. The idea of you know, I don't know what, I'll be honest with you, I don't know what transit runs through here, if that's a viable option for people to go to through this area. Maybe it is.
Did you guys not talk with the local transit group?
I wasn't involved in this project from the very beginning, from the planning. I'm just being honest, and I'm saying I don't know. I'd rather say that than be told I'm saying the wrong thing. But I mean, the other reality is this is a state highway. It's State Highway Route 111 that connects to Route 2. So it is a major commuter route through there. So, you know, it's always the balance of if you build it, they will come, or if you don't build it, they'll go somewhere else. Maybe they will. Maybe if we have one lane, they won't go through there, but maybe they'll be going through the neighborhood streets. And then you'll be getting the calls that people are using my street as a cut through and my kids are playing on the street. So, you know, the fact is this is a state route. It's a major arterial through the area, and this is where the traffic should be if there's cars on the road. So again, we're showing you the options here, and we're just telling you, you know, through the modeling and through the analysis what we see what the impacts would be.
So just to respond from the committee as well, I mean, this plan is an attempt to make this a more walkable place where the kind of development that has less climate impact can occur. And it's not perfect, and we are living in a community where everyone virtually has a car and needs a car. Many of us need cars to get to our jobs, even those of us that use transit. So, you know, I think the idea that, and as I think the consultants have pointed out, the funding for this project requires abiding by the various requirements of the state and the federal government about how you manage roadways. And so I think that the planners have done the best that they have been able to do so far to try and improve bicycle and pedestrian accessibility and safety in this area, and as well meet the traffic requirements that come along with MassDOT. And I think the idea that somehow we can just let the intersection become totally clogged up, and that will result in a better outcome for the climate for Acton, I don't think makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, is it working? Yeah. Oh, okay, thanks. Hi, Chris Starr, 6 Littlefield Road, 19-year resident of Acton, and also landowner in Kelley's Corner. First of all, I'm all for a nicer Kelley's Corner. I think GPI has done a great job and some great work so far. but I still have some grave concerns about the current design. You know, once it passes from this point and going beyond the 25% design, as I think we've heard multiple times throughout the night, is that particularly the 111 approach, the approach where Charter Road meets 111 and Kelley's Corner itself and the takings involved there. There's a number of things that are going to be outside of these people's control, outside of the selectmen's control, outside of the committee's control. It's going to be in state control. So we're not going to have easy and readily available ways to go to these people and say what our concerns are. So we have to get it right at this point. I'm really concerned that local businesses aren't really being protected in this plan. I mean, I've never really been told by this committee or by the town how many parking spaces will be eliminated from Whelan and the Bolodrome. These are businesses that have been around for years. In the case of the Bolodrome, for decades. And these are congregation spots for kids and for everybody in town. But I've never really gotten a clear understanding of how many parking spaces necessarily have been removed. And that equates to how viable are these businesses going to be in the future. You know, you eliminate parking spaces. In fact, I believe the most recent plan I've seen eliminates over half of the parking at Whelan. Whelan already has a parking problem. They're already stuffed to the gills at lunch rush. So you take half their parking, they're not going to survive. 7 years of my tenant's life, Jason Brady's life, who's a lifelong resident of Acton, is going to be gone. His business is going to be decimated. So these are things that have to be considered in the plan going forward. So what I'm saying is that this plan has to be right before it goes forward. You know, I've never really understood how many stately trees are going to be removed during this process. I mean, the trees that we see, I've been involved in the Belmont Trapella Road redevelopment project that was a TIP project, much like this. In fact, a $17 million project. This is a $14 million project. And they took down all the trees and they put these little tiny little yellow lotus, you know, whatever, trees in the place of these stately trees. So those are things that I haven't really seen really addressed. I don't understand what the answers are when one of the members of the MPO, you know, the MPO with the MassDOT, the guys that are giving the $14 million here, one of the former members was the selectman here in Acton. He came here at the last hearing and said this plan did not meet the Complete Streets plan and the Complete Streets guidelines of MassDOT. So that concerns me. And then finally, and most importantly, is pedestrian safety. All it takes is one goofy kid and one impatient driver to be going through that intersection to hurt or kill a kid. It could be my kid, it could be anybody's kid in this room. To say, well, maybe we were a little hasty with this design. So these are the reasons why this plan has to make sense. It has to make sense before we let it out of our control and put it into the bureaucracy's control, the state and federal government. I'd like the town to address these issues, and I think that this is on the path for having, if I'm not mistaken, having the 25% hearings in the fall, not in June or July. Is that correct? Okay, so that we can address those issues. So I don't know if you know Kevin Dandrade. He was president of the Traffic Engineering Society for New England. he's my traffic engineer. He couldn't come here tonight because he broke his ankle. He was very sorry. And he sends his regards to you guys because he knows that you guys do good work. But these issues need to be addressed before we move out of 25%. 25% sounds like a little bit, it sounds like a quarter, what's 25%? But 25% is the game. You know that, John. You guys, I'm sure you know that. So this is where we have to get it right. So please, town, selectmen, committee, KC committee, please get this right first before we move it out of 25%. Thank you so much.
Sorry, Chris, can I ask a couple of questions? Chris?
Yeah.
So, I mean, is there a particular plan or process that you're looking to be in? So you referenced, for example, another traffic engineer.
Sure.
So can you sort of expand on that? Are you looking for that traffic engineer to come in and sort of meet with GPI, the committee, the town, et cetera? Is that what?
That would be fabulous. I think that there are people that have been involved in a multi-year process. And Andy, I mean, you guys have tried very hard to try to pull everybody together, and I understand that. But really, this is go time. We need to bring those people together, those divergent interests, and let's come up with a plan that everybody can agree on, and then we can all walk into town meeting or petition the MPO and say, hey, look, this is the right plan for Acton. So yes, that's great, Andy. That would be a good idea.
Can I just comment? I don't know if I can go back through them all, but just to comment on the process, the 25% in the Mass DOT process. The public hearing isn't an end-all be-all. The point, I mean, Mass DOT typically will do a lot of work prior to the public hearing, and we've been in contact with them. Obviously, we didn't design this under a cover or anything. I mean, we've been going back and forth with the left turn lanes and so forth. But the public hearing is just that. It's the opportunity for the public. Typically, it's the first time that the Mass DOT folks are hearing the concerns from the public. And you can comment at the public hearing. You also have a week or so after that to submit written documents. Often the design changes significantly from there. And we also don't know what their comments are on this. This is the first time they're digging into it as well. They may come back and say, we don't want this. We don't think it's appropriate to put that northbound right turn lane. Can the town live with those cues? So, I mean, we're not saying it's in Mass DOT's hands now. We're never going to see it or comment it again. So you know, I would say,
John, I'm a real estate developer. I've used that tactic before, that you're going to be able to have opportunities to chime in later on in the process.
Yes,
That's a standard line.
I can tell you projects where we have submitted 25%. I can tell you projects we have submitted 3 or 4 25% design plans before it's advanced to the 75. Because of public concerns, because of right-of-way concerns, because of ADA concerns, because of environmental concerns, whatever it is.
But wouldn't you agree, John, that 25% is like the
25% is a lot of work to get to, yes.
Right.
But it's not the end-all be-all. If you know Route 9 out in Westboro, at Lyman Street, that's under construction now.
Right.
4 25% submissions for that. 3 years on designing 25% plans. Because things changed.
I remember debating the tree species at a 25% hearing in Belmont and having a hard time even getting the certain trees that I wanted. That's how detailed it comes out of 25%. It's a concept plan that is really, and MassDOT doesn't like things coming out of 25% that isn't fully baked.
I beg to differ because we deal with Mass DOT daily. We have,
and I'm not a traffic engineer.
You can ask Kevin, you can ask the folks at Mass DOT at District 3.
Please, one person at a time. We can't hear. Sorry.
The projects that we've done, we listen to the towns, we listen to the people. We are doing a project in Stoughton now. On our dime, we went back and did a 25% design because we felt it wasn't correct.
Okay.
So we are committed to this project. We are telling you, we're giving you the information. If the town says we don't want left turn lanes there, and the state is good with that, we'll design it.
But why not fix it now when it's cheaper?
I'm all for fixing it now.
So how about we all agree
to your point, what we need to do is, a lot of this is dependent on what Mass DOT will accept or not accept. So I think they need to be at the table, and we'll have their comments after this. Before we go to 25%, the public hearing, we'll have their comments, we'll have a sense of where they're coming from. They may come back and say they don't like this.
Is MassDOT in this room right now?
No, Mass DOT is not in this room
Okay,
right now.
so they haven't heard our concerns at this point.
They have not.
Okay, so perhaps, why don't we work out our local concerns first before we move into the 25%
Well, what
design?
I would suggest doing, don't want to speak for you guys, but if there are public concerns, get them to Mass DOT now while they're reviewing it.
There have been some,
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is exactly why we're having this meeting tonight.
Right.
Let me ask you a question, Chris. There are
Yes,
kids
Peter,
all
of
over the
course.
place, right now. I mean, they're crossing in
Right.
front of Kmart. They don't bother to go to the crosswalk to get to
Oh,
Sorrento's. They're
you better
crossing
believe
right
it.
in the middle of the
Right,
street, all this
right.
traffic. They're coming through the path to the Hosmer House. They're crossing in front of Not Your Average Joe's. They're probably
believe it.
crossing Kitty Corner, like you said.
Yeah.
How does this design make it less safe for all those kids than what currently exists there?
Okay, one answer, larger curb-to-curb distances. Peter, you already said it earlier. Larger curb-to-curb
10
distances.
feet.
That was not the question.
No, it was a question.
Chris, the question was not the specific thing about more distance curb to curb. The question is this particular plan make the overall collection of intersections and all of the places where the kids cross the street safer or less safe than what we have today?
I would argue less safe because the curb-to-curb distances are greater and the streets are wider that are going to produce faster traffic. It's absolutely the truth. So Peter said the kids aren't going to cross where they're supposed to cross, and I completely agree with that. And then secondly, he asked, well, what aspect of this plan would make it less safe? And I said curb-to-curb distances, which would invariably increase the risk for any kid going across the street. It would. So how were you arguing? I don't even understand where your argument was coming from.
There are several traffic islands there where streets are not going from 30 feet to 60 feet, but there are islands in the middle so people have a halfway zone.
Okay, well, I don't know of any kid that's going to sit on an island waiting for traffic. Okay. But my point is faster traffic in larger curb-to-curb distances are going to increase risk. There's no question about it, okay?
Well,
I mean, is anybody going to argue that one?
I think going back to the overall system, again, I think the argument is yes, that it is going to be safer than now. But I think we need to move on because you've made your points, and I think people...
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Yep.
All right, Jim.
Jim Snyder Grant, Half Moon Hill. So this has been really helpful in understanding this, and I'm still confused about a couple things that would help me understand whether I think the second lanes are a good idea. So two kinds of questions. One's about traffic, and the other's about trees. So we'll do the traffic ones first. So you have these the nice projected traffic analysis about the delay distance. Do we have the current data on a slide or in your head about how long those delays are now? Because they seem much larger than that right now.
Yes, once this wraps up, I can pull it up on the computer there.
Okay, but the general sense is that it is longer now,
yeah.
Right? Okay, so my concern from a traffic planning point of view is that At this point, the traffic is backed up enough that people are choosing different routes because it's so slow to go through there. My concern is that if we increase the size of the pipe that fits cars through there, and the line starts getting shorter, those cars that are taking different trips will now say, oh, hey, it's only going to take me 2.5 minutes to get through Kelley's Corner instead of the 5 minutes it is now, because I'm all the way, right now it's like beyond the hardware store. So it seems like there's this chance of a traffic paradox here where when you increase the capacity, the number of cars that comes through increases because it becomes a relatively more attractive option. And you end up with the same congestion and having spent a lot of money. It doesn't seem like a good win. And I wonder if you had a experience or theory about that you could share.
Well, that is the conundrum. I mean, it's the if you build it, they will come. And there is some truth to that. I mean, it's also looking at, okay, where are those vehicles now? Are they going through some neighborhood streets or residential neighborhoods that they really shouldn't be, and they're going through there because they can't get through this intersection? So, if that's the case and they do gradually over time come back to this intersection, will this intersection, see traffic increases? It probably will, but there will be benefits in other areas where those cars aren't. I mean, we run into this in other areas where we're asked, looking at traffic calming, the typical cars are zipping down my street, and so you put something in on that street, now the next street over wants it, now the next street over wants it. So there is that balance. I mean, this is these are the two major arterials where the traffic should be. So if we're looking at it, in that term, we are accounting for growth over the next 20 years so we're building that capacity into the intersection. The technology we're putting in terms of the signals and the operations is right now state of the art, which probably next week will be obsolete, but we do the best we can. But you're trying to build in that extra capacity to account for that. Obviously, I mean, we're doing a 20-year projection, so you would hope that it's 20 years, you're never going to have congestion out there. No, but you would hope that 10, 15 years, you would that traffic that is built into that model to come back into it. But that's a reality. I mean, any road you built, you add a lane, eventually it's going to get filled up.
Okay. The other side of that paradox, it seems to me, is that I wanted to get your thoughts about was. Especially in a more congested situation, if you increase the flow through one intersection, you're creating extra traffic at the next intersection. So I'm wondering if we have an understanding yet of how this increasing the flow through there increases the flow either through West Acton, Acton Center, or South Acton. Whether we have any either sort of theoretical data about that or observational data or anything. Just looking for. That's
an interesting question. We've run into that before on some projects, and I mean, part of it is, again, that traffic engineering is not an easy science, unfortunately. It's a balancing act, and the fact that is you have a problem here that you're looking to fix. Might that ultimately create some problems further down the road? Theoretically, pardon the pun. It may, but does that mean you don't fix this? I mean, it's when you look at the big picture, the overall travel time between A and B probably doesn't change that much, given the number of driveways and everything else particularly along this corridor. So I would find it pretty unlikely that traffic is going to be moving so. Maybe I'm backing myself into a corner here, but moving so efficiently through this intersection that you're going to now see traffic jams, 3 or 4 miles down the road at intersection X, Y, or Z. But I think the reality is you have some traffic and safety issues at this location that do need to be addressed. And if by doing that you do see some residual impacts at other locations, then I mean, that's the, unfortunately, that's the ongoing process. But in general, I mean, we've done thousands of intersections and corridors and things like that. I don't think I've ever seen one where it's been like, oh my God, now the intersection a mile down the road is, we can't get through because there's so much traffic coming down there. I think it just tends to balance itself out.
Thank you. So just back to trees, do we know, what is the difference in the number of large tree takings between a model that has the two left turn lanes or a model that has just one?
I don't have a number of the difference in those. I could probably easily get that, but I will tell you it's not as easy as now you're doing this much less work, only because of the grades. And if you can picture a lot of those trees on the slope on Mass Ave between Charter and the intersection. Yeah,
those are definitely the grandest trees there. So I think it's probably helpful to focus on those for a minute so we can understand that.
So the any widening at all, essentially, some of those trees will go just because of their location and the slope. We have a section I can show you, but also the landscaping plans at the bottom there, John. Yeah. Yeah, okay, so you can see all the red. So everything in red are trees to be removed. What you can't see on this plan is the trees, well, you can see, they're the larger circles shown as the proposed trees. I can tell you project-wide, the offset is 120 trees removed, 157 trees proposed. But in this location in general, it's a little more difficult.
120 and 157?
121 and 157.
Great.
But in this location in particular, a lot of locations it's the sidewalk is going to be there or the lane widening is where the tree is and it has to go. In this location in particular, it's due to the slopes, and I can show you a section that shows the extended, the widening, the sidewalk, and then a retaining wall. And it's ultimately, it's not the final footprint of the retaining wall that makes the trees have to be removed to construct it, but it's the construction of the retaining wall and the excavation process that will probably undermine a lot of those trees, given the way they sit on that slope right now, which is a bit, some of them may not live through the construction process anyway, just because of the condition they're in or where they're at right now. This is a little bit tough to see, it's kind of bright, but you can see this is one section showing the retaining wall on the left side here, higher than the sidewalk. And that's the location where the construction of that and the widening, the construction of that wall will result in the loss of trees in that location. I can try to look at a number, but it won't vary greatly just because it's the depth of excavation for that wall, which is needed in either situation.
I was going to ask unrelated questions and mention trees, but it seems that there are tree people that want to talk about trees, so I'm going to let them go first, and then.
Thanks. I am accurately called a tree person. Absolutely adore, live for large historic trees. I wanted to ask mainly if we all can have these slides, because a lot of the stuff that's online is really hard to see. And you said, not just these slides, but you have slides you said that showed which trees are removed in red, including down that way. So if there can be a way to actually get that?
I can provide everything to the steering committee. And
just to state an opinion, I would like to figure out a way. I'm not going to get into traffic engineering ever in my life, so y'all, thank you. I do want to say I think it's great that you're going to put in lights and do something about the safety around the schools and the buses getting out and that particular intersection. I think there's clearly some real safety coming with the traffic lights that you're doing and other things that but otherwise, I'm going to stay out of that whole situation. But I really, really hope that we can figure out how to save the character of the area. The drawing that you showed is just what I imagined. I grew up in the Midwest. To me, it looks like a wide, flat Midwestern town. and what that parts of that intersection. Yes, we have hills, we have old stone walls, we have tree. That's New England, and that's what I love being here. So what I cringe to think that the intersection is going to be wide open with the little trees that I grew up with. During my lifetime, clearly someday, 50 years from now, there'll be big trees. But these historic trees and the historic character of the area, particularly along the schools, the old high school, I think it really behooves us to try to preserve, and that's the part that I don't see in this plan yet. I think if you have a light down near the school and it's keeping it safe for people to get out and it's time to let the buses out, you shouldn't have to have the turn lane, the wide turn lanes, adding an extra lane of turn lanes all the way down through the schools. Anything we can do to change where the sidewalks are, not widen it so far, save some of those historic trees along the schools is my plea to the committee.
Tara Fredericks again. I hope you don't go to a 25% hearing until we've solved these issues. I think it's, if we're going to solve them, let's solve them now. But I have some questions. There was 127 before and 157 after. Did I get that right?
121 to be removed and 157 to be proposed.
Does that number include just trees over a certain number of inches?
Nope, honestly, it's every tree that shows to be removed, each one counted.
And so does that include the clear, where it says clear cut? Each one of those were counted?
I don't believe it says clear cut anywhere. There's grubbing, clearing and grubbing, and that's when it's smaller shrubs and things like that. That's when clearing and grubbing is called.
The plan I was looking at, it actually says clear cut on it.
Sorry, Tara, can I interrupt for one
yes.
sec? Tara, can you clarify that? Because you've used that term several times now about clear cutting. Do you know which plan it is, which section that it is on?
Yes, I do have the maps right here. There's one area where it's right by the exit ramp. That's a clear cut.
So
there was
So I think if we could pull up one of those drawings, particularly.
Maybe I misread it.
At the Route 2 ramps?
Well, there were just areas where I noted the words clear cut.
So just because that's a term that doesn't seem, one, it has a different connotation than I think what's going on here. But the other is I'm not sure whether that's, it could be in there, but it'd be interesting to see
Your Charter Road, John?
what it really means.
The next sheet? Yeah, it's tough to see, yeah.
So my basic question, back to my question, which was the net number of tree inches that are removed. That's how the Concord Tree Preservation Bylaw works. They measure the caliper of the trees, and then they add it all up, and you've got to replace the same number of inches of trees, not just a huge, majestic, 3-foot wide tree with a sapling. It doesn't count as a one-for-one replacement. So I would like that information. I would like the net number of caliper inches, or however they measured it. Thank you.
Sorry, can I follow up on that? I have a question on that. So actually one thing about the landscape plan that I think, getting away from this idea about quantity, and there certainly are a few trees that are quite lovely and wouldn't be ashamed to see them go. But one of the things about the overall landscape and sort of general sort of aesthetic of Kelley's Corner is that it's always what I'd call sort of has dissonance. There's nothing really integrated about it, whether it's the buildings, whether it's the sidewalks, certainly whether it's a landscape. So when you start to think about the landscape in Kelley's Corner, so for example, if you think about what's that stretch on 27 in front of Kmart, well, there really are no trees there, for example, right? So currently there are no trees there. You cross the street, and you get a few trees when you come up by the Verizon on that side of the road. You cross the street over on the sort of subway side of the street. There may be 1 or 2 trees over there. You turn the corner, you go right, you go down towards 111, towards Route 2. There's a smattering of landscape. You get in front of CVS, and they sort of have a suburban lawn in front of CVS. The one section of what I think, is a legitimate concern is about those going from 27 up towards Charter Road. And that's sort of, as people refer to, as that's kind of sort of traditional landscape or sort of old sort of landscape that has a quality about it. But again, that's one piece of it. When you think about the overall aesthetic, again, of the landscape, it is not integrated. And that's one of the aspects about this plan, is that you're going to have a sense of a place. So it's the other thing about Kelley's Corner, there is no sense of place. It's not a destination either literally in terms of sort of the confluence of civic and commercial, because right now it's essentially a commercial district. But it's also, there's no sense of place in terms of physicality, and it's sort of the aesthetics that are there. And so this landscape plan that's being proposed is more than simply just a series of X number of caliber inches. I mean, what, you know, it's about sort of laying out a overall plan. It's more than just trees. It's about sort of hardscape. It's about sort of other types of plantings. It's about, again, sort of an overall sense of sort of integration in this, which just simply does not exist now. And so I think to go into some quantitative analysis about how many trees there are and this or that is sort of missing the point. And, you know, you could have, to get to your X number of quantitative sort of caliber inches, you might need 300 trees, but then you might not be able to plant them in any sort of logical sort of order that made any sense or made any sort of nice landscape. So it's not really about quantity. And so it's certainly true that there are a few trees here that you would not want to see go. And, you know, that's really the heart of it. But the rest of it, it's a landscape that you could do without, you know.
Let me just add one or two brief comments to that. One example of Andy's creating more of a sense of place is a pocket park that's designed where the Verizon switching building is right now, that'll add green space, add a place for kids to come and hang out and attract people to it. The other thing is we need to look at those trees you're talking about on 111. Some arborists that we've heard from have said that they're nearing the end of their natural life. And the important thing is if you take those trees down to plant new trees in the place of them. So trees do have a life to them. Maybe they can be saved somehow. I don't know. We don't need to get into that right now, but that's one thing we need to look at. If you have any arborist opinions, any arborists' written opinions on those? No, but I think we're going to be probably following up with that at some of our public meetings.
This is what I think I heard. I think I heard that it's not just about quantity. I feel like that is the disconnect. That for me, it is about green space and about saving as many trees as possible. And the number of trees that process the carbon footprint from the cars that are sitting there. I'm personally nearing the end of my natural life, and I don't want to be removed to speed up traffic. Although I know a lot of officials would prefer that. It looks like you know, there's a lot that I like about this plan, okay? But I think that there's a net negative that we can take care of if we just admit that we want to and get to the table. Bueno Huisano, do you guys remember Meineke, the Meineke building? And nobody...
Sorry, I hate to interrupt Tara, but...
I'm making a point.
I realize that, but I don't know if Franny, I think, was going to try and speak a second ago.
Oh, yes, that's right, because I was
and then you can go.
He's right. I'll come back and talk about Bueno Huisano.
Well, I don't know where to start or begin, or end. So, so I'm just going to list, I don't need full answers to these, but I just want to get them on the record as concerns or things I'm caring about. I care about the fact that the Kelley's Corner Committee has worked really hard on this, and it's sort of like the Little Red Hen story, everybody comes late for the bread. But luckily, people are coming not for the bread, but they're coming right before it, maybe to help out for the last part. So I just want to acknowledge and thank you for all of your work. And I would like to see this go through. So I have first an initial question. If the MPO votes in favor of this 25% design being on the tip, can we then continue and work with the local businesses, work with the arborists, work with all these questions, and come up with a new 25% design. What's the timeline for that look like?
So it's currently programmed for the 2022 tip. And projects get moved. You could potentially lose funding if it gets moved, but that usually doesn't happen. But again, I mean, the 25% hearing, the purpose of that is to get the public input. And like I say, it's not unheard of to do another 25%. I mean, speaking as the designers, we would obviously, if there's things that have to change it sooner than later. So, I mean, you know, again, we're presenting this information to the town, to the public, to the committee, and I'm sure there's going to be discussions on what that looks like. You know, like I said, Mass DOT is not here. We're waiting for their comments. There's going to be, you know, as much as we're having these discussions with the town and the public here, we're going to have the same type of discussions with them to see what they want. I mean, for all we know, they may come back and say, hey, you need 8-foot shoulders out there, but, you know, I mean, I don't know. We don't know what those comments are going to look like. So when we proposed this, we had extensive conversations with them about the double left turn lane, the signalization of Charter Road, and what we saw as the benefits of doing that, particularly the Charter Road, and convincing them to add that signal. Again, we don't know, we haven't seen their comments yet, but while there is a significant effort to get to the 25%, we are still, you know, we are by no means at the final design. So.
Okay, because I want to see it move forward. I want to see us make a change there. I want to see a change of the feel there. And when I just look at this intersection and picture cars moving quickly through, I don't feel that. But I'm hoping that with some creative use by whomever of the Kmart lot, looking at walkability more than drivability, walking more than parking is in our future. But somehow I feel that I don't want to just put it on hold. I feel like we have done that for many years, and I would like to see us continue, but I don't want to get to a point where somebody says, oh, sorry, too late for that. I've seen this so many times. I've seen a MassDOT meeting where they were saying within 15 minutes of them, it's too far along, and we've just gotten started. So anyway, I want to make sure we have input. I would like to make sure that we work with the businesses. At the same time, it bothers me to take one little, and I know Chris knows I feel this way, one little ugly building and base our entire plan on it. I'd rather work with them and make sure that the business has a place and has an ability to stay in business, but not necessarily protecting that little corner. I also want to note we have a public transportation system, $14 million. I'm not proposing this, but I just want to point out that $14 million would add enough shuttle buses for 14 years that we could get a lot of people out of their cars. You know, if we had every 15 minutes this shuttle going around, right now it comes every hour, and it's scary unless you really have to depend on the CAT bus or to call ahead for the other. I just want to really think about that. I also feel like it's short-sighted to be thinking about parking and all this. We're going to have automated vehicles before long, and it's going to be a totally different scene. So making all these plans based on parking and traffic as it is now, we're in 10, 20 years, we're going to be saying, oh, what were we thinking? I mean, I don't know where we're going, but we're definitely not going to be where we are right now. And I like the idea of saving trees and working on it, but I don't want to see us stop the process. So I'd like us continuing. And again, I thank you all for all the work.
Just so one small follow-up on that. So in terms of mass transit, I know might be a small thing, but by the Charter Road entrance, we are designing in a bus stop for the mass transit system. So there is some thought and consideration about that.
Yeah, I just want to note that I actually am of the opinion that the bus should not be stopping out there, should be stopping at the school, so all the parents picking up and dropping off their kids and the students see it. And it was just for time reasons that they didn't go into the school campus, and I actually think that's not why. So I just want to go on record saying that I think we should, better that yet even, thank you for that bus stop, but I think we should also be going into the schools.
So I just wanted to echo some of the things that Franny said. First of all, I think that definitely we should move forward, but I think we need to move forward with a plan that's well thought out and that's fully vetted and ready for prime time. I think we have an opportunity to create a viable town center and a sense of place that Andy was talking about. I don't know where Andy went, but and I think that these are really important goals that MassDOT is going to be looking at when they're doing their funding. Is this accretive to the businesses and to the town economic development? I think that one of the things, though, that has to be looked at when you look at economic development in this project is that slowing down traffic actually improves economic development. Because when you have regional traffic going through there very quickly, nobody has time to look around and see what businesses are there. It's very true, and there are studies that show this. Also, you know, I think that we really have to be realistic about the kinds of changes that are going to happen there. I mean, I was involved again with the Trapello Road redevelopment, and now they're completely done with that project, $17 million spent. And I wait at the same intersections that I used to wait at. I wait at the same queues, and there really isn't a dramatically changed traffic situation there. I think that what they did there, at least in Belmont, was they slowed down traffic enough so that there was better pedestrian safety, and that there was more of a sense of place, and that there was more of these goals being met. But I think all of us, I don't know how many people here go through Crosby Corner on Route 2. I do. And I do during rush hour. And unfortunately, the queue up now, it's no quicker to go through the stretch of Route 2 into Boston than it was, I don't know, how many years of construction happened on Route 2. I can't imagine how many millions of dollars were spent there, and I can't imagine the takings that were involved in that strip from Crosby Corner along to that gas station up to the turnoff into Lincoln. But what I'm saying is that, you know, I think what we really need to do, again, is to make this plan right before we move it out to 25%. I don't mean to bang that gong too heavily, but I think it's very important for us to move forward, but move forward with confidence to make that 25% hearing a very boring and uneventful hearing. You could have, John, I bet you guys, and I'm sorry, your name is Lindsay. I bet you guys would love to have a 25% hearing, that there's not a big line at the mic. I mean, there's not a lot of people being adverse to it. So why don't we make it that kind of situation where it's a love-in, not, you know, a debate. And that's what I'm hoping that we're going to get out of tonight, that we're going to move forward, but we're going to move forward together, not in a situation where, you know, we're going to have to redevelop that 25%, because 25% hearings doesn't mean 50%. So anyway, thanks so much, guys.
Hi, I'm Christy Anderson, and I'm here representing the Finance Committee right now. I also live in town. I'm wondering how much we lose out on monetarily if we don't do this? My understanding is that the state will pay for a large portion of getting this done because of them owning 111 versus us owning 27. Can you speak to that? Or am I completely wrong?
Well, the project is going through the TIP process. So the funding for the construction is, it doesn't have to do with whether it's a state 111 or 27. It's because it's programmed on the TIP that the state's contributing, I think it's 80% of the construction cost.
And is that the 14 million number I've heard mentioned earlier? Okay.
And the, what's that? That's the total. That's, yeah. And it's also federal funding with that as well. The issue is that if the project is delayed and it can't be advertised on the 2022 TIP, you could, in theory, lose your line in place, your place in line, or your line in place. That usually doesn't happen. Usually the TIP can absorb it. It would just get pushed back to 2023, let's say, and you would still have the funding and the project would still go forward. But there's no guarantee with anything. But usually the TIP is always fluctuating enough that projects drop off. They can't get right of way. They can't get an environmental certification. So that one gets backed up a year. Now those funds become available. So so it's not that, but it's the TIP process that's giving you the funding. It doesn't matter whether it's because it's a local road and a state road.
Right. Let me just add to that. The town has appropriated $750,000 to get to 100% design. Actually, what was defeated at town meeting was a request for an additional appropriation because of these changes that have been made to the design to pay for those and pay for appraisals that the town needs to do in order to take property that would be required by the widening of the road. So if the question is if this were never to go forward with the state, the town would be out close to $1 million.
Okay. Well, that's very close to my next question, which is if the town people decide we don't want to do this, are there any improvements that would eventually need to be made to that intersection that we would have to bear the full cost of? Or would we just be living with a bad traffic situation?
I mean, I can't really answer that because it is a state intersection and 111 is a state road. So, I mean, at some point, if traffic gets to the point that something has to be done out there, the state could just come through and do it.
Okay. So this lets us have some control over
You're
what
having
happens.
some control. I mean, I will say that, having worked with Mass DOT for 20 plus years, that the process that we're going through now in terms of them kind of designing and listening to the public is significantly different. I mean, I can remember projects starting out, you go to the 25% hearing, it'd be the first time anyone sees you, and you roll out the solution to the problem. And now they are very much concerned about, complete streets, bike impaired, environmental, right-of-way impacts, and all that. And they do, they do consider that going through the process. So, again, we keep saying the 25%, I think until we have their comments, we don't really know what side of the fence they're on or how they feel about this project at all. This is the first time they're really getting into the review of it. So, I mean, I think the idea of hopefully we'll get they've had it since February, hopefully we'll get their comments within the next month or so. And then we can have an understanding of where they're coming from, and depending on what comes out of this hearing, or meeting, I shouldn't say hearing, this meeting is that, we can then go to them and say, look, there's genuine concerns about the northbound right turn lane, for instance. And, if we weren't to do that, this is what would happen, would that kill the project, or would it still be a viable project in terms of Mass DOT? They may come back and say, if the town is good with that's fine, but we don't want to give up the capacity or the movements on 111. So there may be some back and forth there.
Okay. I know when you're building a house or renovating a house, you need to bring it up to certain codes. If we decided that purely on the town's dollar, we wanted to make certain changes to the intersection, would there be other things we had to bring up to code? Like, would we have to change the crosswalks to be ADA compliant?
Yeah, you would, if the town, well, first of all, it's a state location, so even if the town said we want to spend $500,000 to make X, Y, and Z improvements at that intersection, you'd still have to do a design, it would still have to go through the whole Mass DOT review and all that, and you would have to, at a minimum, bring it up to ADA compliance.
But that wouldn't necessarily be through TIP, and we'd be paying for the whole thing.
That would not be through the TIP, that's correct. That would just be on your own dime, and you would still have to, like I say, all the wheelchair ramps, all the sidewalks for whatever, and again, if you're just doing a wheelchair ramp, you know, now that's the sidewalk. Now that sidewalk has to be built out to a point where it can logically tie back into the roadway system. So, you know, then you have to upgrade the signals. All have to have, you know, pedestrian accommodations and the upgraded buttons, and so it's not as simple as, okay, hey, we want to, you know, give another 3 feet of pavement to get a bike accommodations in there. As soon as you put a shovel in the ground, you're triggering that. You have to have all that compliance.
So what I'm hearing from you is that if we wanted to simply improve pedestrians walking through that intersection, that we would have significant changes that would need to be made.
Yeah, it would still be going through the same review, and you would still, because it is state highway, you would still have to provide the bike accommodations, the pedestrian accommodations, the ADA accommodations, that whole.
Thank you.
Hi, Deborah Symes. I have a few things. I'm going to try to do them rapid fire. One is thank you. Two is I really want to see something go forward here. I don't want to lose this opportunity yet again. I want to echo a lot of what Franny said, and in particular the piece about not stopping this process on the basis of one commercial property. You know, if we need those lanes. I don't know if we do. I want to say a couple of things about landscaping. One is that there's a big difference, and I'm not familiar enough. So actually one of the things I want to know is there a way, if you provide what you've got to the steering committee, that we can get a look at the actual nature of the plantings, like what's being proposed? Because a lot of, you know, like if I see another Chanticleer pear, I'm going to puke because they're trash trees and people use them a lot. So I'd love to know if that's possible.
So quickly, just because it is the 25%, that design isn't fine-tuned to the point of species and sizes and all of that. It's very conceptual at this point. Yeah.
Then let me just say, let me add for the committee that I would really like us to remember that native plants are much better in a bunch of ways. What else am I trying to remember to say? I want to echo what Andy said about old trees are wonderful and grand, and they're sacred, and that's great. Not every old tree, I don't think, needs to stay. So judiciously, if we can, you know, save some, that's great. I don't personally feel like every single old tree needs to be saved necessarily. You know, trees are in cycles too. They live, they die, they live, they die. And my concern would be putting in something that's really appropriate and going to be able to live healthfully in that environment. So Andy's point about integration, part of what people experience when they move through that intersection is obviously the visual vista. That's whatever the buildings are, but it's also all the other small stuff that they couldn't say, oh, it's about this tree and that light fixture or whatever, but that is a big piece. And so one of the things I think is important to think about, as Andy was saying, is how that helps integrate. And one of the ways that happens is you don't just do like, here's a tree, there's a space, then there's a tree, then there's a space. You want to create corridors and a sense of flow, which isn't always about entirely straight lines, because that really helps people feel like, oh, this is actually an organismic and vital and welcoming experience, as opposed to, you know, the little marching soldiers along the street sides. Last, John, when you said the thing about the goals, I was thinking, I don't actually know what the pillars of the charge that you had were. I'm guessing one was traffic, one was pedestrian, you know, safety, blah, 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 walkability, all those kinds of things. Maybe economic development was one of them. But I encourage you, when you're thinking about whatever those different buckets are, it's so easy to let traffic be the big one. And I really encourage you to just kind of think, what actually is important to us? And I would say traffic is number 2 or 3 on my list, to be quite honest. So I ask you to think more about how you would weight each of those things. Thank you. need to clarify some math. So, at least in my finance world, the costs that you paid before are sunk costs, unless you are obligated to do them again in the future. And I want to ask some questions about avoided future costs, because it may just be that the cheapest, if that's all you're interested in is the money, the cheapest thing is to stop the project now, based on the number of FTE staff time that is spent on this, based on whatever other operating money is spent on this, and what other obligations that we have to fund whatever line items. I'd also like to have us look at the option of, going forward with something like this, slimming it down to be what we thought it was going to be way back when, without the turning lanes, without all these extra lights, without the islands, back when it was, a project that was at least closer to what I thought we would do, and think in terms of avoided future costs that way. Because in my mind, I feel like the money that we're spending now every year with the FTE costs and the consulting costs and the money that's sitting in town hall waiting to be spent, we could be putting in, we could be fixing the timing on the lights, we could put the no left turns and lanes in, we could be doing sidewalks right now, maybe not all perfect, but you've talked about waivers. We hear about people getting waivers for a lot of this stuff, and I think that we're in a good position to do that because they are so interested in doing something here. So I urge us to do a phased approach, and I urge us not to go to that 25% hearing until we solve these very important issues. Thank you.
Hi, Susan Jick. First, I also want to add my thanks to the committee. I know this has been a really challenging corner, a difficult place. I want to reiterate a lot of what Franny and Deborah said. I would love to see this go forward. I was very compelled by what Andy said about a sense of place and a cohesive plan and really stepping back and creating a whole area that is a town center, if you will. And what I feel that I hear now are a couple things where people are saying, yes, let's go forward, but let's do it together. I feel like this is an opportunity to work together instead of to present a plan. And I think Chris actually said this. This is our chance to make sure that we're all happy when we get to that 25% hearing. Make sure that people are heard, make sure that we work together and understand which trees maybe we can save, which ones are just, it's not possible. So if we're working together, then there isn't that sense of adversarial, adversariness, whatever, in the end. So let's work together. Let's get to a place where we feel like we've gotten there together. I think that would be a much more constructive process. And I'm really hoping that this is the beginning of that and that we can do that so we can get to a much nicer Kelley's Corner. So thank you guys, and yeah, let's work together so we can please get to a place where we can keep going.
Quick question, those traffic tie-ups, how long, when it takes a long time, how many minutes a day is that?
Sorry. You're looking at obviously the commuting hours, so 7 to 9 in the morning, 4 to 6 in the afternoon, obviously out there with the schools. That afternoon probably starts closer to 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So I mean, it's a good amount of time that traffic is heavy through there. Is it 700-foot queue all the time? No, but it's that is a pretty heavily traveled route.
Okay, and somebody on the transportation committee, which I've been on for many years, I remember looking at some one-way big circle, including Prospect. I remember they always used to talk about that. Did you look at things like that?
I believe we did it back at the very early planning stages of this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we looked at, I mean, the planning process obviously has been going on for several years, and I mean, these guys know better than I do, and we've looked at a number of different concepts, including, one way this way, one way that way, and and different options.
Okay, thanks.
Danny Factor again. I'm just here to say thanks. When I, attended one of your meetings at 7 in the morning on behalf of a land use subcommittee of Green Acton, I thought that the committee, and particularly Andy, who had this idea for setting up this meeting, was very responsive, and I just very much appreciate setting up this nice night. I think we had a nice turnout of people with some really interesting and provocative questions, and I appreciate everybody here being responsive and setting up the night. Thank you. And particularly having scheduling an evening meeting as well. Thank you.
Yeah, ditto that. And I just wanted to make sure to be clear that when I talk about working together and going forward, I feel like we need to be open to changes being made. There's definite concerns about the sidewalk, the curb distance being greater than it needs to be. Do we need those extra turning lanes? But if we can have a conversation, we can address those. And I'm not saying that I love this plan as it is. I'm saying I feel like that there's a lot of good work, but we need to go forward and make sure everybody's concerns are addressed and listened to. Thanks.
Hopefully it's my last comment, and it's more of a 30,000-foot view of Kelley's Corner and the lack of cumulative planning. In business, you manage by balance sheet, so you don't spend your fixed assets unless it's a really important thing to do. And I feel like we have to stop approving curb cuts and projects without looking at the long-term impact of what road capacity is getting used up. The CVS special use permit was not, we did not have to approve that. All of those changes that are now required, we had that option to say no to those things. We have way back when, the Meineke building, what I was trying to say before is that we never thought it would be Bueno Isano, right? So if you can think past what you think can't be done and look for what you can and want to be done, and then we can figure out how to get there. Because for me, I think that it's a treasure that we have this business there and it's thriving, and I don't have a problem working around it, especially when across the street there's plenty of unused parking spaces and unused everything that we could figure out solutions around. And so thank you for having this meeting. I really appreciate the dialogue. I hope this is the beginning of a collaboration, not just some kind of prerequisite hearing to listen to us and so noted. I would like to see us go to the table. I would like to see us come up with a design over the summer that we can actually, again, come together at a 25% hearing, not to schedule a hearing until we have that design, so that we're not up against the wall having to do this and having to make all these choices because of deadline. I think this is an important enough decision that I think we should take our time. Thank you.
Just my thanks as well. It's been really educational. One bit of education I forgot to get for myself is speed limits there. Is it reasonable and legal for us to reduce the speed limits down to 20 or 25 miles an hour there? Not that almost any car ever goes that fast there, but right now it's marked at like 35, I think. I mean, it's dangerously fast speed limits there. So I'm wondering what the regulations are there and whether we have any slack with the state to lower those.
The speed limits are actually set based on the travel speeds of the vehicles. It's established based on the 85th percentile speed. The other thing, again, to keep in mind is that is a major arterial roadway. All the speed limits are, again, governed by Mass DOT. So, are you going to post 25 miles an hour on, a major arterial? It could possibly be done. To your point, I don't think anyone's ever going to drive 25 miles an hour there. So, what exactly are you doing by doing that? Yeah, it says black and white. I guess you could have a cruiser out there writing tickets, but the reality is, people drive how the road is designed, and the design speed on this is, I believe, is 30 miles an hour. So that's just the geometry of the road that controls how fast you drive. That's really how you control the speeds. The posted speed, I mean, my personal feeling is it's kind of arbitrary.
Thank you.
Can I add one more thing? I think everybody recognizes that from 7 a.m. until 4 p.m., Mass Ave from Route 27 west to Prospect Street is 20 miles an hour because of the school zone.
Yes, arterial speed limits. Whelan, Sudbury, 126, Route 27. These places had 30, 35-mile speed limits right through their sound centers, and they're now 20. Okay, so however they did it, I think we should be doing it. Wellesley, there's a Route 2 that goes right through Harvard Square. It's now 20 miles an hour. This is the trend, and I think that we need to value ourselves enough to know that we can go after this and achieve it. Thank you.
Seeing no one at the microphone. I would like to, on Annie's behalf, who had to leave early, thank all of you for coming, for all of your comments. And we're obviously not making any decisions tonight. And we obviously need to arrange another meeting or two like this in the future at some undetermined date. In the meantime, the interested stakeholders should send your comments to, I don't know, whatever the unspecified state recipient is for comments, but also you can send them to Kelley's Corner Steering Committee.
I'm just going to request that the next meeting that we have, it be like around a big table with maps and things that we can like draw on and bring our engineers and bring our horticulturalists, arborists, and have it be like a working session so we can go over possibilities. So if you would just consider it. Thank you.